military satellite just before the plane broke apart 23 minutes after takeoff. But Russian state media is now reporting that investigators haven't found any sign of explosive impact on the victims' bodies. At the same time, there's new concern tonight of possible ties to terrorism. The head of al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri, is urging Islamic militants everywhere to unite in attacks against the West, and also he's singling out Russia. He made the call in an undated recording released one day after the Russian airliner disaster. We're covering all that, much more this hour with our guests, including Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger. He's a veteran of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And our correspondents and expert analysts, they are also standing by. Let's begin with CNN's Brian Todd on the very latest on the crash investigation. Brian, there are some potentially major new developments.
Potentially very significant, Wolf. Tonight, new information about a burst of heat detected just about at the moment this plane broke apart. There was clearly a catastrophic event in the air. And tonight, investigators are scrambling to determine if this was mechanical or if it was terrorism. Tonight, a U.S. official tells CNN a military satellite picked up what the Pentagon calls a heat flash in midair shortly before the plane crashed, perhaps the signature of an explosion. Starkly contrasting a report from a Russian state news agency saying so far none of the recovered bodies of passengers show evidence of explosive impact. Tonight, CNN has learned despite that report, U.S. government experts still aren't ruling out the possibility of a bomb on board, even as they weigh other scenarios. What could cause a catastrophic event?
Many things. We've had history of fatigue cracks that were discovered after maintenance repairs had been done. We've had planes where the skin is disintegrated flying over oceanic routes. So that kind of catastrophic failure, we have issues about cargo hold, we have issues on engines.
Experts say the security at Sharm el-Sheikh Airport has to be investigated. How rigorous is security at that airport?
The Sharm el-Sheikh Airport has multiple layers of security. Initially upon arriving at the airport driveway, and then prior to check-in, and then upon check-in itself. As at any airport in the world, there are a number of ways to get a bomb aboard, and whether it's through a person entering through a regular check-in process or through the baggage process.
If a bomb did bring down this plane, there's no shortage of groups sworn to launch attacks. The ISIS affiliate in Sinai claimed responsibility. But analysts say that group likely doesn't have the capability to get a bomb onto a passenger plane. They say two terrorist organizations could pull it off. The Khorasan group, tied to al-Qaeda's branch in Syria. They've been developing bomb-making capability, experts say, and would be motivated to strike at a Russian commercial plane because the Russians are bombing them in Syria. And al-Qaeda in Yemen, which has twice gotten sophisticated bombs onto U.S.-bound planes.
And they have a master bomb maker called Ibrahim al-Asiri, who is constantly coming up with more sophisticated devices, trying to beat airport security devices made out of PETN, are difficult to detect, explosive with non-metallic components. He's been experimenting, it's believed, with new generations of shoe bombs, new generations of underwear bombs.
Also tonight, al-Qaeda's leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri, in a recording we believe was released on Sunday, the day after this crash, called on jihadists to fight the West and to fight Russia. But so far, no claim of responsibility from al-Qaeda in the Sinai crash. And analysts say, given that this would have been a huge terror success for al-Qaeda, their silence so far suggests they may not be responsible for this incident. Wolf.
And Brian, investigators are also looking at some abnormal sounds around the time the plane disappeared.
Yes, Russia's privately owned Interfax news agency, Wolf, cites an unnamed source saying the plane's cockpit voice recorder captured uncharacteristic sounds the moment before the flight disappeared from radar. It's not clear exactly what those sounds were. One safety analyst says it could simply reflect whatever catastrophic event was occurring. That's got to be a point of the investigation tonight as well.
I'm sure it will be. All right, Brian, thanks very much. Let's go to our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr. Barbara, the heat signature doesn't necessarily prove it's a bomb, but it is setting off alarm bells.
It is setting off a good deal of concern, Wolf, across the security agencies here in Washington. And let's try and unpack it and explain why. You basically have two scenarios here. Was there some type of mechanical structural failure on the plane, or was it a terrorist attack? Now, Egyptian investigators are finishing up their work in the field. Now they turn their attention to the voice and data recorders and any of the forensic evidence they can gather from the wreckage. So They will look at the voice and data recorders to try and determine how the explosion happened, how hot, how fast, velocity. Can they determine where it began on the aircraft? What can that tell them about this event? But intelligence services are also looking at any threat streams, any indication that there might have been a group out there that could have pulled this off. How do they do that? They look at passenger lists, the cargo hold. What kind of cargo was on the plane? Was there any possibility that someone could have gotten to the plane and tampered with it? Very complex, and it's why you're seeing a lot of these conflicting reports. Some news reports saying there's no explosives, there's no evidence of blast injuries, and yet the president, one of the spokesmen for the airline saying there's absolutely no evidence of a mechanical failure that could have led this plane to break apart. So the bottom line is we're going to have to wait. The investigation is likely to take a very long time, and it is going to get a lot of scrutiny around the world as to how the Egyptians and how the Russians are going to handle this. Wolf?
All right, Barbara, thank you. At the same time, the Russian state media they're citing an unnamed source close to the investigation as saying investigators haven't found any sign of explosive impact on the bodies of the victims. 224 people were aboard that plane. Our senior international correspondent, Matthew Chance, is in St. Petersburg, Russia for us. Matthew, how is all of this being reported tonight in Russia? What kind of safety record do the airlines there have to begin with?
Well, first of all, I think it's fair to say that the Kremlin is trying to play down any links between this air catastrophe and terrorism. Earlier this morning, the Kremlin spokesman said that it would be wrong to draw a linkage between the intervention in Syria, for instance, and this bomb attack. He said that, and this aircraft disaster, implying it was a bomb attack. He said that would be a wrong conclusion to draw. But, you know, it's going to look bad for the government, whichever way it goes. If it does turn out to be some kind of terrorist attack, then, you know, the government is open to the accusation that its intervention in Syria perhaps has made the Russian people vulnerable. If it turns out to be a technical failure, the government is also likely to be criticised because it hasn't done enough, people will say, to protect air travellers in the skies on Russian aircraft. And so it's in a pretty much of a lose-lose situation. Russia does have a very checkered history when it comes to airline safety. It's affected by terrorism, it's affected by poor maintenance and technical issues as well. And so many people that I've spoken to here in St. Petersburg are saying that this is just the latest in a long line of air disasters to afflict this country.
There certainly have been. I want you to stand by. We're going to get back to you, but I want to dig deeper right now into all of this with the former NTSB Managing Director, our CNN aviation analyst, Peter Gulls. Our aviation correspondent, Richard Quest, is also joining us right now. Let's first of all talk about this Russian news agency, Interfax. It's reporting that there were unusual sounds heard on the cockpit voice recorder just before the flight disappeared. Richard, what does that suggest?
Well, I mean, without knowing what the sounds were, but this is not unusual. It happened with MH17, and we're talking about sometimes just, in that case, milliseconds before the recording stopped. They were able to detect the pressure wave and the sound of the missile. And again, on TWA 800, again, they can always hear any noise, any external noise. And the flight data recorders will show tremendous changes and sudden shifts in parameters just literally before the explosion cuts the power. But what, of course, causes the explosion, it won't tell them that.
Peter, can the analysts who are listening to that cockpit voice recorder, looking at the flight data recorder, can they make a distinction between the sound that a bomb would have caused as opposed to a mechanical failure?
Yes, in some cases you can. As Richard mentioned, in TWA 800, we had just a millisecond of sound, but we had scientists compare that sound to the sounds from Pan Am 103, which was a bomb. And we saw that there were distinct differences between the signatures, even though it was just a millisecond. So if there is a little bit of sound, we can figure it out.
So that basically that even a millisecond could make a difference listening to that.
You can tell whether it is a high order explosion or a more low order event, like a decompression and a tearing apart of the aircraft.
Richard, we know that the credibility of the Russians, what they're going to say, the credibility for that matter of the Egyptians, they have a lot of motives, if you will, to put various spin on what may be coming out. What kind of trust, what kind of credibility do they have in providing this kind of information to the world right now?
Basically, they are on trial and tested. I spoke this afternoon, Wolf, to the Egyptian tourism minister. He first of all said that he believed everything in terms of security at Sharm el-Sheikh. He said it was fully compatible with international regulations. And I asked him, can you promise us a free, fair, independent investigation? And he said yes. He said, I followed it up. I said, but what if it proves that Egypt was deficient in some way? And he says, well, we'll just have to live with that. You know, he said, you can't keep, his exact words were, you can't hide the facts. And so, from what he says, now, of course, I can't, we can pass it by saying if the Egyptians and the Russians, if there's a tussle between the two sides. But at the moment, the Egyptians are saying everything is above board and will be revealed.
Richard, Peter, both of you stand by for a moment. I want to bring in the former